Before the story begins, if you enjoy cinematic sci-fi where humanity stands toe-to-toe with the darkness of the universe, take a second to like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. It helps the channel more than you know, and now let's begin. No civilized star chart acknowledged the place where the auction was held. The station drifted in a seam of dead space between trade lanes, its mass hidden behind layers of sensor-scrambling alloy and the kind of corruption credits could buy. Elias Rourke hated places like this, not for the danger but for the certainty of it. Nothing good ever happened in a room where the galaxy gathered to sell its nightmares. From the observation gantry, Elias watched rows of Syndicate delegates settle into their gravity thrones. They came in all shapes biology allowed: scaled, vaporous, chitin-plated, silk-skinned. They came with guards, data slates, and the arrogant confidence of those who had never faced consequences. Elias wore the same neutral courier insignia he always did, blending into the background as just another contracted systems specialist. To them he was invisible. To him that was survival. The lights dimmed. The floor trembled. Below, the containment field descended with a sound like a dying star being throttled. Chains thicker than shuttle hulls tightened, runic suppressors glowing in angry cobalt as they bit into flesh that should not have existed. The thing that stood at the center of the arena was massive but not mindless. Its body carried the scars of wars older than most species' recorded history, fractured armor plates grown, not forged, and eyes like collapsed suns. Barkal. The name rippled through the chamber without being spoken. The Syndicates called it the apex predator, the world ender, the final solution to rebellion. Entire civilizations had written their extinction myths around it. Supposedly, it had taken fleets to bring the creature down, and half of those reports were classified even now. Elias had read what fragments he could find. None of them explained how something like that could be standing in chains. A Syndicate herald floated forward, voice amplified, smug with triumph. Behold the universe's apex instrument. Captured. Conditioned. Obedient. A switch was thrown. Pain lanced through the creature's body in visible waves, light crawling beneath its skin as the suppressors activated. The predator roared, not in fury, Elias realized, but in restraint. The sound rattled the gantry shields and sent lesser beings recoiling. Still it did not strike its bonds. It did not lash out. It endured. That unsettled Elias more than violence ever could. Around him, the bidders reacted with approval. Credit tallies jumped. Contracts whispered themselves into existence. These beings weren't just buying a weapon. They were buying proof that nothing in the universe was truly free. Elias felt his jaw tighten as he logged system diagnostics, hands steady despite the spike in his pulse. He told himself he was here for the payout, same as always. Then the predator's gaze shifted. It moved slowly, deliberately, settling on the gantry where Elias stood among a half-dozen technicians and guards. Those eyes passed over the armed Syndicate elites without interest. They paused on the non-combatants. On the humans. On him. Elias froze. Years in hostile sectors had trained him to recognize predatory focus, and this was not hunger. It was assessment. Awareness. The creature's pupils contracted, its head tilting almost imperceptibly, as though cataloging details that should have been irrelevant. His posture, his insignia, the regulated stillness of someone trying very hard not to be noticed. A guard noticed the lingering stare and shifted his weapon, prompting another surge of pain from the control console. The predator exhaled slowly and looked away, the moment severed. Elias released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The auction continued. Demonstrations followed. Smaller enslaved constructs were released into the arena and torn apart on command, precision replacing savagery at every gesture. The predator moved when ordered and stopped when told, flawless execution without excess. The Syndicates applauded. Elias felt sick. Hours passed. When the crowd finally dispersed to feast and negotiate, Elias received his next assignment: remain behind and repair fluctuations in the containment field. Routine work, his handler assured him. The kind that paid well because few lasted long doing it. He descended alone. Up close, the predator was quieter. Massive shoulders rose and fell with controlled breaths. The suppressors dimmed to a low glow, pain moderated but never removed. Elias knelt by the nearest field projector, tools humming softly as he worked. He forced himself not to look directly at the creature, even as a prickle of awareness climbed his spine. "You're not broken," Elias muttered before he could stop himself, voice barely louder than the tools. One eye turned toward him. There was no surge of violence. No sudden movement. Just attention. The field flickered. Alarms chirped as the projector faltered, its output dropping for a fraction of a second, long enough for the chain nearest Elias to slacken and snap against the deck. He stumbled backward, heart slamming, expecting death. It never came. The predator shifted, not toward him but away, bracing its weight to keep the chain from recoiling. The action cost it. Elias saw the suppressors flare brighter, the pain response screaming silently across the creature's form. Still it held. Elias scrambled, rerouting power and stabilizing the field at last. When he looked up again, the moment had passed. The chain lay still. The predator resumed its posture, eyes forward, as though nothing had happened. But Elias knew better. As security forces stormed in, barking orders and shoving him aside, Elias caught that gaze one final time. This time there was something unmistakable in it. Not submission. Not rage. Expectation. Elias was escorted back to the upper decks and dismissed with a warning. As he returned to his quarters, the station's lights dimmed briefly, power rerouting toward the containment levels. Somewhere below, the predator waited. Not for freedom. For a decision. And for the first time since Elias had taken work beyond lawful space, he wondered whether the most dangerous thing on that station wasn't the chain god in the arena, but what would happen if it ever decided who was worth protecting. The universe had tried to enslave its greatest predator. It had not yet asked the one question that mattered most, what side it would choose. Elias slept poorly. The station's artificial nights cycled in gentle waves, but his dreams ignored it, returning again and again to eyes like collapsed stars and the weight of a choice he hadn't known he was making. When the summons came, it was not unexpected. Syndicates did not tolerate anomalies, and Elias had become one the moment Varkal had spared him. 2 guards collected him from his quarters at weapons-ready alert. They said nothing as they escorted him back through maintenance corridors toward the containment levels. The air grew colder with every bulkhead, the hum of the station deepening into a vibration felt in bone rather than ear. "They want demonstrations," one guard finally said, voice thick with distaste. Again. The arena had been cleared of bidders, replaced by a ring of syndicate overseers and compliance engineers. Elias recognized key figures from the auction, their confidence now edged with caution. Varkal stood where it had before, chains drawn tighter, suppressors set to a higher threshold. The air tasted faintly of ozone and fear. Elias was ordered to the control dais, not as a technician this time but as an observer. They wanted witnesses. They wanted responsibility to stick if something went wrong. A new captive was dragged into the arena, a bipedal species with soft features and restraint scars still fresh along its arms. It struggled weakly, eyes wide as it took in the scale of the being towering above it. Elias felt something twist in his chest as the syndicate herald announced the test parameters. Controlled aggression. Target discrimination. Obedience under duress. The order was given. Varkal did not move. A murmur rippled through the overseers. The compliance signal spiked, flooding the suppressors with pain sufficient to cripple capital warforms. The predator's body tensed, claws gouging into the floor, but still it did not strike. Elias' breath caught. He understood then that what he had sensed before was not patience, it was resolve. Varkal was choosing even now. Again the herald snapped. The captive cried out as the predator finally moved, but not toward them. Varkal stepped between the smaller being and the compliance field, placing its own body as a barrier. The act was clumsy, restricted by chains, but unmistakable. Silence followed, heavy and disbelieving. The syndicates reacted swiftly. Power levels escalated beyond safety margins. Warning sigils flared across Elias displays as the control system strained to maintain coherence. Varkal roared then, a sound torn free from restraint, and Elias felt it resonate through his chest not as fury but as defiance. "Shut it down," someone barked. No one moved. Elias did. He reached for the nearest auxiliary panel, hands blurring as he rerouted energy away from the suppressors and into the containment field. It was a risk that bordered on suicidal. If the field failed, the predator would be free. If it chose violence, no one in that chamber would leave alive. The pain dropped abruptly. Varkal staggered but remained standing, breathing heavy, eyes locking onto Elias with startling clarity. For a suspended heartbeat, the universe waited. Varkal lowered its head. Not submission. Acknowledgement. Security swarmed the arena, weapons trained on both Elias and the predator. The smaller captive was yanked free and dragged out, alive. The herald sputtered accusations, demanding Elias' immediate execution. He was shoved to his knees, wrists bound, a compliance collar slapped around his throat with practiced efficiency. "You interfered," the herald hissed, leaning close. Explain yourself. Elias met its gaze, pulse steady despite the collar's weight. You wanted obedience, he said. You got judgment. The answer earned him pain, a controlled burst meant to teach submission. Elias grunted but did not cry out. Across the arena, Varkal stiffened, reacting as though the sensation had been inflicted upon it instead. That was all the evidence the Syndicates needed. Elias was declared compromised. He was property now, another variable to be tested. Rather than execute him, they had found something better. Something instructive. He was taken below the arena, secured within a narrow service bay that overlooked the containment chamber through layered transparisteel. Alone, restrained, and fully visible. The lights dimmed. Maintenance cycle automated. Guards withdrew to the perimeter. Elias exhaled slowly, working his shoulders against the bindings until circulation returned to his fingers. It was pointless, he knew. The collar was synced to the station's central command. Escape was not an option. Movement drew his attention. Varkal had turned toward the service bay. Without the spectacle, without an audience demanding cruelty, the predator seemed different. Still enormous, still lethal, but quieter, the tension coiled beneath its surface now directed inward rather than outward. It approached as far as the chains allowed, close enough that Elias could see the intricate patterning along its armor skin, each ridge bearing the marks of ancient conflict. Elias swallowed. Speaking to it felt absurd, and necessary. They're afraid, he said softly. Not of what you are. Of what you decide. Varkal regarded him in silence. Then, slowly, it extended one clawed hand and pressed it against the transparisteel separating them. The barrier groaned under the contact but did not fail. Something brushed Elias' mind, not words but impressions. Memory. Endless commands. Endless battles. Orders that led only to annihilation. Beneath it all, a concept barely remembered. Choice. Elias placed his palm where the claw rested, the cold of the glass seeping into his skin. They don't give us that, he murmured. But we take it anyway. The suppressors pulsed faintly as if in protest, then stilled. Varkal withdrew its hand and straightened, gaze lifting toward the unseen stars beyond the station's hull. The impression faded, leaving Elias shaken and breathless, but certain of one thing. The predator was not learning how to obey. It was learning who was worth listening to. As alarms echoed faintly in the distance, new protocols spinning up, new fears taking shape, Elias understood that the Syndicates had already lost. They just didn't know it yet. The Syndicates moved quickly once fear outweighed profit. Elias felt the shift before he heard it, sensed it in the tightened patrol patterns and the subtle recalibration of the collar at his throat. They were done testing. What frightened them now was not Varkal's strength, but its hesitation, the fact that it could choose differently again. A compliance engineer entered the service bay with 2 guards and a device Elias had never seen integrated into a collar before. Its surface shimmered with archaic script, symbols so old their origins had been lost to time. The engineer spoke with forced confidence as the device synced. Neural override, he explained to no one in particular. Direct command imprint. After this, it won't hesitate. Elias' pulse spiked. He recognized the script, not from syndicate files, but from fragmented human archives passed down through scavenger networks and forbidden libraries. Pre-expansion markers. Human. Or rather, something humanity had once been part of before history fractured and forgot itself. You don't know what that's for, Elias said. The engineer sneered. It's for control. The override activated. Across the transparisteel, Varkal's body convulsed as the suppressors flared white-hot. The ancient glyphs along its collar ignited, flooding its nervous system with intrusive directives. The predator roared, a sound that fractured panels and triggered emergency braces across the chamber. Elias slammed against his restraints as feedback rippled through his own collar, pain blooming behind his eyes. Then the roar cut off. Varkal went still. The engineer exhaled sharply, relief breaking through arrogance. There, he said. See? Even gods kneel to the right language. Varkal's head rose slowly. Its eyes were clear. Not empty. Not obedient. Clear. The command glyphs flickered, struggling to resolve intent, and for the first time the control systems hesitated. The language they used had never been meant for domination. It had been written for cooperation, for alignment of purpose between equals. The override searched for authority and found only choice. Varkal chose. The chains snapped. Not violently, precisely. Stress fractures propagated along engineered weak points, points Varkal had memorized over hours of stillness. The containment field surged in response, and Varkal stepped into it willingly, forcing the system to compensate beyond its limits. The field collapsed in on itself with a thundercrack that threw guards from their feet. The service bay door buckled outward as Varkal moved. Elias' restraints loosened as power fluctuated. He tore the collar free with blood-slicked fingers and rolled aside as Varkal's massive form filled the bay. The Predator did not acknowledge him immediately. It turned instead toward the approaching security teams, positioning its body between Elias and the gunfire that followed. Blaster fire stitched the air. Varkal advanced regardless, absorbing impacts that would have liquefied lesser beings. It did not strike indiscriminately. Every movement was deliberate. Weapons were crushed. Control consoles were dismantled, not detonated. Elias realized with awe that Varkal was not attacking the station. It was disarming it. Elias scrambled to his feet and ran, not away but alongside. He knew the layout, knew where the system junctions converged. Alarms blared as he dropped access locks and rerouted pathways, herding fleeing captives and technicians toward maintenance shafts. Overhead, the station shuddered as systems went dark one by one. Syndicate leaders attempted to broadcast surrender demands, threats, offers. Varkal ignored them all. Instead, it interfaced. Using the same ancient glyphs, Varkal flooded the station's comm network with a signal that carried intent as much as sound. It was not a declaration of war. It was a statement of alignment. I was shaped to end resistance. The message resonated through every speaker, every implant capable of receiving it. I was never asked what should endure. Elias felt the words more than he heard them. Human workers froze, stunned. Enslaved beings wept openly, falling to their knees not in fear but in disbelief. I choose those who choose, Varkal continued. Those who stand without chains. External sensors lit up as Syndicate reinforcements warped in, gunships, enforcement cruisers, predators of profit drawn by distress calls. They arrived to find the station's weapons dormant, its shields reconfigured. Varkal stepped onto the hull through a rent in the metal that should not have supported its weight and raised its head toward the void. Space warped around it, reacting as though recognizing an ancient constant. The first cruiser fired. Varkal intercepted the beam with its own body, energy dispersing harmlessly across its armor. Elias watched from a viewport as the Predator advanced through vacuum, moving with impossible grace. One by one, the Syndicate vessels were disabled, not destroyed but neutralized, their drives fused, their weapons silenced. The message echoed again, carried on open channels across nearby systems. Leave. Or witness what restraint looks like when it ends. They left. Silence followed, broken only by the soft hum of systems coming back online under Elias' redirected commands. The station drifted powerless, stripped of its teeth. Rescue signals flared, this time not to buyers, but to anyone willing to answer without a price. Varkal returned to the breach and looked down at Elias through fractured transparisteel. The Predator's presence pressed against the station like gravity itself, immense yet controlled. Elias met its gaze, chest tight with exhaustion and something dangerously close to hope. You didn't have to stay, he said, voice hoarse. Varkal inclined its head, the gesture now familiar. In the quiet that followed, Elias understood the implication of what had been done. The Syndicates had lost their greatest weapon. The galaxy had just learned that its apex predator could refuse. And beyond the station's ruined hull, human space lay only a jump away. Varkal turned its gaze in that direction. Not as a conqueror. As a guardian deciding where to stand. The galaxy did not respond with gratitude. It responded with fear. Within days, the transmission from the shattered Syndicate station was rebroadcast across every major network, stripped of context and saturated with alarmist commentary. Footage of Varkal moving through vacuum played on a loop, its immense silhouette framed as proof that extinction had chosen a side. Panic rippled outward like a shockwave. Trade routes closed. Defense fleets mobilized. Emergency sessions of the Galactic Council were called with a speed reserved for apocalyptic events. Elias watched it unfold from a human medical bay, bandages wrapped tight around his forearms and ribs still aching from suppressed feedback burns. He should have felt triumphant. Instead, a familiar unease settled in his chest. The Syndicates were cornered, but the galaxy at large was already preparing to make the same mistake, confusing alliance with submission. The Council demanded answers. Humanity received the summons. The chamber was older than most civilizations, its architecture designed to intimidate species and used to scale. Elias stood alone at the center dais, his courier insignia replaced by a plain human uniform bearing no rank. That had been deliberate. He represented no power structure but humanity's willingness to speak for itself. Varkal did not enter. That omission spoke louder than presence ever could. Counselors hurled accusations thinly veiled as concern. They cited casualty projections, historical precedent, extinction curves. Humanity was irresponsible, they claimed, reckless for allowing an apex entity to align itself without oversight or guarantees. Elias listened, letting the noise exhaust itself. When he finally spoke, the chamber quieted, not because of authority, but because silence was unexpected. "You're afraid the wrong species made a friend," Elias said. "What terrifies you is that we didn't chain it first." He told them what the Syndicates never had, the truth of Varkal's restraint, of the captive spared, of the station that could have been annihilated and wasn't. He described a being shaped entirely by command finally encountering refusal without cruelty. Choice without exploitation. "You ask why it stood with us," Elias continued. "It's because we stood without telling it to kneel." The response was immediate and divided. Some counselors recoiled. Others watched him with unsettling intensity, recalculating centuries of assumed hierarchy. A proposal was introduced within minutes: preemptive extermination. Eliminate Varkal before humanity's influence spread any further. The chamber lights dimmed as a new signal requested entry. Varkal announced itself. The predator did not enter through the council's great gates. It remained in orbit above the neutral chamber, visible through the vast transparisteel ceiling where stars bent subtly around its mass. Even now it did not bring weapons to bear. It waited. At Elias' nod, the council allowed the transmission. Varkal's voice resonated through the chamber, translated not as sound but as meaning. "I stand where I was not commanded," it conveyed. "I remain where I am not feared into compliance." Some counselors flinched at the directness. Others leaned forward, rapt and horrified. "I will not rule," Varkal continued. "I will not serve empires. I will not kneel to councils that speak of safety while sharpening knives. I have ended worlds under orders. I will not do so by consensus." Elias felt the weight of every eye swing toward him, searching for subterfuge, for ambition. He offered none. Humanity's response followed, broadcast openly without encryption. No threats. No pledges of control. A single declaration of boundary and intent. Varkal was recognized as an independent allied entity, bound by mutual defense and mutual refusal of domination. No command protocols. No failsafes. The galaxy erupted. Some systems severed ties with humanity overnight. Others quietly reinstated old travel agreements, calculating that standing near humans had suddenly become safer than standing alone. Former Syndicate territories erupted into chaos as their enforcers vanished, prisons cracked open, and unpaid debts dissolved into violence and freedom in equal measure. Through it all, Varkal moved carefully. It dismantled Syndicate strongholds with almost surgical precision, targeting infrastructure, not populations. Freed captives were escorted to safe zones coordinated by human relief fleets. For the first time in living memory, worlds that had been born in chains saw telescopes point not in fear but in hope. Elias accompanied Varkal to the edge of human space months later, aboard a vessel that required no escort. The Predator remained outside the hull, drifting alongside with ease, its presence a constant pressure against the void. "You could leave," Elias said during one of their silent exchanges. "No one could stop you." Varkal turned, stars warping slightly as it regarded him. The response came not as words but as shared understanding. Humanity had been small, unremarkable by galactic standards. But when faced with overwhelming force, it had chosen relationship over control. "I choose proximity," Varkal conveyed. "Not ownership." They reached the perimeter of the Sol system and halted. Earth glowed softly in the distance, blue and fragile beneath its blanket of satellites and defenses that suddenly felt inadequate. Varkal did not cross the threshold. It took position beyond it. Elias watched as the Predator settled into a slow, deliberate orbit, a sentinel stance that required no announcement. The gesture was unmistakable. Not a fortress. A promise. Behind them, the galaxy watched, divided between those who would test that promise and those wise enough never to try. And as Earth turned peacefully beneath Varkal's silent vigil, Elias knew the story was no longer about whether humanity had gained a protector. It was about how long the universe would take to understand what that protection truly meant. Years passed. Humanity had grown bolder in its reach across the stars, yet never reckless in its alliances. Earth remained the axis, the cradle of this new balance, and yet Elias Rourke had changed more than the world around him. Lines etched into his face, scars faint but stubborn, told of countless encounters, near deaths survived and quiet victories won without fanfare. He had aged in ways measured not in years but in the weight of responsibility. The station where he now observed the void was a small outpost near the outer rim, far from the core, far from those who had once labeled him expendable. Elias had come here because Varkal had called him, not in words, not in commands, but in the subtle resonance of presence. The predator moved differently now, no longer restrained, no longer chained, yet never imposing. Its enormous form rested in orbit near the station, quiet as a shadow that watched the light, a sentinel rather than a conqueror. Elias approached the viewport, scanning the void. He could see the faint outline of Varkal's armor beneath the stars, massive plates scarred but gleaming, a monument to both survival and restraint. The creature's eyes, when they turned toward him, carried the same awareness they had decades ago, but tempered now with understanding. Elias could feel it study him as thoroughly as he studied it. "You've changed," Elias said, though he knew it could not hear in a human sense. It could feel his intent, sense his reflections, and that was enough. "You don't move as fast, but you're still as dangerous as ever." Varkal shifted slightly, a gesture subtle yet deliberate, and Elias recognized the communication beneath it. It was acknowledgement, perhaps even agreement. The predator had observed humanity for years, learning not just our tactics, but our persistence, our ethics, the stubbornness that refused to be crushed by fear or greed. And it had chosen to stay near Earth not because it had to, but because it had decided that humanity was worth guarding. Beyond the station, the edge of the system trembled. Sensors flared, picking up a distant anomaly, a fleet moving in the darkness, its signature unfamiliar and aggressive. Elias' stomach tightened. He had seen enough to know this was no routine patrol or exploratory mission. Something was coming, something patient, something calculating. Varkal sensed it too, the subtle vibration through the hull, the tension in the vacuum, the anticipation before the strike. Elias moved to the command console, fingers flying over controls, preparing for the unknown. Communications channels were locked down, satellites rerouted, warning signals sent. Every preparation mattered, yet he knew instinctively that preparation alone would not be enough. The difference now, however, was that he had an ally the galaxy had never counted on. The anomaly revealed itself. A fleet, vast and silent, the kind of force that had once made entire systems tremble. Elias' breath caught, but he did not panic. Varkal shifted, stepping outward from the orbit with a presence that dwarfed even the largest vessels. The Predator's armor shimmered under the starlight, energy signatures flickering like warning lights across its form. The fleet hesitated, its sensors struggling to interpret the movement of something that should have been impossible to exist outside legend. Elias' heart pounded. "This is it," he murmured. "This is why you stayed." The fleet opened fire. Energy lances tore across the void, each impact dispersed by Varkal with precision, the Predator moving not with brute force alone but with the calculated restraint of one who understood leverage and consequence. Entire cruisers found themselves disabled before they could even bring weapons to bear. Yet not a single human ship was harmed, not a single station was collateral damage. Elias realized once again that Varkal did not destroy for victory, it neutralized for survival, for protection. Varkal's roar broke the vacuum, amplified through resonance fields, a sound felt rather than heard, a declaration of intent that reverberated through the fleet's sensors and systems. Elias felt it in his chest, a wave of warning and resolve. The attackers faltered, communication disrupted, coordination broken. They had underestimated the alliance they had sought to challenge. Amid the chaos, Elias activated the station's auxiliary transmissions. Images of Varkal in protective orbit, movements precise and disciplined, spread across nearby colonies and human fleets. The message was simple: humanity does not fight alone, and those who threaten it will face forces the galaxy has never seen. The climax unfolded with a quiet intensity. Varkal moved through the fleet like a storm through calm air, disabling ships, severing supply lines, yet never taking a life that did not present immediate threat. Elias, coordinating remotely, guided trapped human vessels through the wreckage, watching in awe as the Predator's choices mirrored his own philosophy of survival without cruelty. Every decision it made was intentional, deliberate, and morally aligned. Finally, the last vessel of the aggressive fleet drifted powerless, signaling surrender. Silence descended over the void, broken only by the hum of residual energy and the soft breathing of Varkal through its internal systems. Elias exhaled slowly, chest tight with relief and the overwhelming recognition of what had just occurred. Humanity had faced annihilation and emerged protected, not by numbers or weapons alone, but by a choice made by the universe's most dangerous being. Varkal returned to its orbit, settling once more near Earth. Its eyes found Elias across the void. There was no need for words. The Predator had demonstrated its allegiance, its restraint, and its understanding of humanity in a way that history would remember, not as masters, not as slaves, but as equals who shared a bond forged in trust and tested by fire. Elias stepped back from the viewport, feeling both small and immense. The galaxy would remember this day. Systems would whisper of the Sentinel at Earth's edge, a creature that had chosen not to destroy, but to protect. And somewhere deep in the void, beyond the reach of even the most ambitious fleets, a presence remained, watching, waiting, ready to act not in terror but in defense. He turned from the window, heart still racing, knowing the story was far from over. Somewhere, some threat was stirring beyond human perception, and when it arrived, Elias and Varkal would be ready. Together. And as the light of Earth bathed the station, Elias smiled faintly, understanding at last the gravity of what had been accomplished. The galaxy had underestimated humanity, and once again, it would learn that some bonds once formed could not be broken. The Predator had chosen, and in doing so, had secured a future no one else could dictate. The universe was watching. Elias and Varkal stood prepared, silent sentinels of a fragile but unyielding humanity. And for the first time in eons, the galaxy realized that true strength was not measured in destruction, but in choice, loyalty, and the courage to stand with those who could not fight alone.